The first war against the Covenant of Glass did not begin with sirens. It began with a miner on Europa dreaming that his daughter was drowning in black water. He woke screaming in a locked bunk with blood under his nails, a broken wrist, and no memory of how he had crossed the room. By the end of that week, 43 people in the colony had confessed to crimes they had never committed. 3 had opened airlocks with calm smiles on their faces, and 1 security officer had murdered his own commanding chief because in his sleep, he had been convinced the woman had worn an alien face. The cameras showed no intruders. The med scans showed no toxins. The walls were sealed. The bodies were healthy. Only the minds were under siege. That was when Earth understood a terrible truth. There are wars fought with ships. Wars fought with fire. Wars fought with hunger and economics and orbitals and steel. And then there are wars fought in the one battlefield no wall can seal. Sleep. Sleep. If you stay with me, you will hear how an alien coalition that had never touched a human world almost conquered our species without landing a single soldier, and how the only people who could stop them were the men and women broken enough to know how to fight inside a nightmare. In the year 218-9, humanity held 13 core systems, 41 colonies, and a reputation that made older species uneasy. We had earned it the hard way. Our first century among the stars had not been graceful. We had crawled through vacuum, famine, piracy, solar flares, machine uprisings on Titan, and a border war with the Varkesh hegemony that taught the galaxy a lesson many still hated. Humans did not quit when sensible species quit. Humans did not surrender when logic advised surrender. And when cornered, humans became something worse than aggressive. They became patient. That patience had built fleets and treaties and a defensive network wrapped around our worlds like a cage of steel. By every known model of warfare, humanity was difficult to invade and expensive to fight. So when the Covenant of Glass decided we had become too dangerous to tolerate, they chose a battlefield where armor meant nothing. The Covenant was not a single empire. It was a coalition of 6 species, linked more by fear than loyalty. The Sealith, who bred memory engineers in birthing vats. The cold-blooded Oru, whose priests treated consciousness like clay. The pale Neme, who believed identity itself was an illness to be cured. And 3 client races too dependent to object. None of them could match the human navy ship for ship. None of them wanted another open war after the Varkash disaster. So they built something cleaner. At least, they called it clean. The first official victim on Earth was not a soldier. She was a schoolteacher in Des Moines, 62 years old, widowed, known for growing tomatoes in indoor soil trays and writing letters on actual paper to her grandchildren on Luna. One night she dreamed she was 8 years old again, standing in the kitchen of her childhood home, listening to her father tell her the war was her fault. He had died 40 years earlier. In the dream he kept smiling while his skin peeled away in translucent strips. Underneath was mirrored glass. She woke in her apartment, walked 3 blocks barefoot to her sleep, and tried to set fire to a commuter rail hub with a maintenance torch. When security drones stopped her, she begged them to kill her before the reflected ones reached her thoughts. The phrase meant nothing then. A week later, that same phrase appeared in Sydney, Nairobi, Tycho City, New Edinburgh, and in a Marine barracks over the Pacific in which 12 decorated veterans all woke at once and attacked each other with their bare hands. Something was moving through human sleep. The Office of Strategic Threat Analysis activated protocols meant for mimetic invasion, neural sabotage, and species-targeted psychogenic assault. They brought in linguists, exobiologists, cryptographers, trauma surgeons, and dream researchers who had spent careers being quietly mocked by serious people in serious uniforms. The task force still had no answers after 19 days. Then Admiral Helena Ward requested a man she had sworn never to use again. Captain Jonah Vance was living under another name on a rain-heavy coast in Oregon when the black shuttle came down. He saw it through the kitchen window while he was grinding coffee. The sea beyond the cliffs was iron gray. Wind struck the glass. His left hand stiffened around the mug before his mind had caught up with the old military reflex. He did not run. You do not spend 26 years in reconnaissance and vanish into civilian life because you enjoy surprises. The shuttle settled in the wet grass. 2 naval security officers stepped out. Then Helena Ward herself emerged in a dark overcoat with rain beating on the shoulders. Yona opened the door before she reached it. "You look terrible," he said. She studied him with the hard blue eyes that had once sent destroyers into impossible kill zones without blinking. "You look alive. Better than expected." "I was hoping disappointment would keep the fleet away from my house." "It did," she said. "Until now." He let her enter. The cabin smelled like coffee, cedar, and the faint medicinal trace of the nerve cream he used on his right leg every morning. That leg had never fully healed after Epsilon Eridani. On damp days, it felt like a wire pulled through bone. Ward looked around at the books, the old maps, the untouched second chair near the fireplace. "Still keeping her side empty?" she asked. Jonah's jaw hardened. "You came a long way to discuss furniture." Ward took off her gloves. "We have a strategic emergency. You have a whole navy. You need someone who has fought cognitive war at depth. No one has fought this." "I know, you're still the closest thing we have." That was the problem. Jonah Vance had commanded Shade Division during the Varkesh War, a classified program so secret most admirals only knew rumors. Officially, Shade Division never existed. Unofficially, it was made of soldiers trained to maintain lucid awareness during induced combat dreams, simulated interrogation loops, sensory collapse drills, and trauma recursion environments. The original purpose had been resistance to neural extraction in case human crews were captured by species using dream state interrogatives. The training had worked. Too well. Shade soldiers learned to recognize false memory textures, to hide intent inside symbolic constructs, to wake on command, to stay sane while nightmare scenarios repeated for days. Many of them survived enemy extraction chambers that shattered ordinary minds in hours. Many of them came home unable to sleep without medication. Some never truly came home at all. Jonah had shut the program down himself after his wife Mara, also Shade-trained, failed to emerge from a deep loop recovery session after the war. Now Helena Ward stood in his kitchen, asking him to raise the dead. "No," he said. She nodded once as if she had expected it. Then she placed a thin slate on the table between them. 16,000 confirmed fatalities across human space, she said. Most self-inflicted, 89,000 hospitalized, 3 battle groups non-operational because crews no longer trust their own thoughts, 2 colonial referendums suspended after mass identity episodes. We've had junior officers countermand fleet orders because they dreamed those orders came from hostile copies. Medical AI can't isolate it. Standard psych screens can't predict it. We think it enters through low-band psionic harmonic carriers embedded in civilian relays, entertainment streams, and subspace beacon lag. Jonah did not touch the slate. Ward continued. We also think it adapts to the target. It uses guilt, shame, grief. It does not simply frighten people. It edits context. It convinces them that betrayal already happened. Ward held his gaze. Because the dream plague knows us now, and because somewhere in your files is the one protocol we buried after Epsilon Eridani. For the first time, something cold moved through him that had nothing to do with weather. You destroyed those records. I destroyed official copies. He laughed once, without humor. Of course you did. We need Shade, Jonah. No. You need corpses that can fight before they understand they're dead. We need survivors. He looked at the empty second chair. For one brief second, he could see Mara there the way she had sat on winter mornings, bare feet tucked beneath her, smiling into coffee steam like the day had promised mercy. Instead, he saw her in the recovery chamber, eyes moving under closed lids, whispering to enemies that did not exist. He turned back to Ward. If I do this, he said quietly, there won't be many rules left. Ward's face became stone. Win first. Regret later. That was how it began. The old Shade files were stored in a place no digital breach could reach. Jonah drove 3 hours south through forest and fog to a decommissioned coastal bunker built into basalt and salt-eaten concrete. The lower vault had no wireless systems, no quantum relays, no connected memory glass. Only mechanical locks, paper archives, and a safe whose combination he had never forgotten, because Mara had chosen it from the day they met. Inside were personnel files, doctrine notes, and a private set of recordings he had sworn never to hear again. He took them all. Commander Elias Rook was the first to answer. Former Marine raider, scar over one eye, humor like a rusted knife. He had spent 9 years on Ganymede training boarding teams, and pretending insomnia was a personality trait. Dr. Talia Chen came next. Civilian neurologist, military contractor, architect of the original lucid resistance scaffolds. She had argued to shut Shade down before Mara died, then spent a decade blaming herself for not arguing louder. Lieutenant Sophia Bell answered from hospital duty on Ceres, once the youngest operative in Shad, now a trauma physician who spoke softly until someone endangered her patients, at which point she could make generals feel 12 years old. Mikhail Orlov took longer. He was in the ruins of an ice-hauling settlement near the Kuiper line, doing private security and drinking himself into a manageable silence. He had lost his brother in the Varkish cages and kept a tally of days sober scratched into the grip of his sidearm. Yana suspected the tally had stopped years ago. There were others, a dozen in all. Once, Shade Division had numbered 28, 87 were dead, 44 unaccounted for. Many refused contact. Some answered and hung up the moment they heard his name. The ones who came met at Artemis Deep, a buried lunar facility beneath Shackleton Crater, chosen because the moon's calm discipline and old military architecture made it easier to isolate mines from contaminated signal traffic. Jonah arrived last. The briefing chamber was circular, low-lit, sealed with analog redundancies. The people waiting inside looked older than memory and harder than age should have made them. Sleep loss etched itself into their posture. Some had tremors. Some had chemical patches at the neck. All of them watched Jonah with a mix of loyalty, anger, and the exhausted caution of people who had once trusted him with their minds. Rook leaned back in his chair. Good to see Command found a use for our collective damage. Safia folded her arms. You could have asked before reviving a buried atrocity. I did ask, Jonah said. You sent a military shuttle, she replied. That's not asking. Talia Chen saved him from answering. She touched the central holo, and a projection of neural lattice unfolded over the table. This is not a standard dream intrusion, she said. It is layered. The signal enters during REM destabilization, but it doesn't deliver simple imagery. It exploits autobiographical memory indexing. In plain language, it finds the emotional hinges in a person's life and hangs new meaning on them. Rook grunted. So it forges memory. Not exactly, Talia said. If it forged memory cleanly, we'd spot the discontinuities. It repaints existing memory with altered motifs. Your father still said the same words. Your wife still left that room. Your commanding officer still gave that order. But now the dream reframes why. It turns ordinary pain into proof of betrayal. Mikhail stared at the projection. It makes every wound personal. Yes, said Talia, and plausible. Jonah asked the question that mattered. Can it be fought? Talia hesitated. That silence told everyone enough. Can it? Jonah repeated. It can be resisted, she said. In theory, lucid anchors still help. Symbolic rejection protocols still work against invasive dream logic. But this thing learns. It reacts to resistance by increasing narrative coherence. It becomes harder to identify as false because it stops behaving like a nightmare and starts behaving like memory. Sophia exhaled slowly. Then anyone fighting it long enough risks losing the distinction. Rook looked at Jonah. And this is where you give the old speech about duty. Jonah met every Gaz in the room. No, he said. This is where I tell you the truth. If we fail, it won't matter how many ships we have. Crews that cannot trust sleep cannot fight. Citizens who cannot trust memory cannot vote, love, command, or obey. This is extinction by self-doubt. Slow enough to look civilized. Total enough to erase us. No one spoke. He continued. I am not asking you to save the fleet. I'm asking you to keep humanity human. The room stayed quiet for 3 breaths. Then Rook said, That's a better speech. So Shaded Division lived again, though no one called it that on paper. Officially, they were the Morpheus countermeasure group. Unofficially, they were 12 veterans too damaged to be fooled by normal definitions of impossible. Training began at once. Not physical training. That would have been easier. And then the fact of that, 2 7-years E-Corps. They slept in sealed pods beneath layered signal jammers while Talia and her staff induced controlled dream environments. Each operative rebuilt the old defenses, anchor objects, recognition phrases, emotional checksum routines, maze collapse drills, pain acceptance thresholds, exit commands. Jonah's anchor was a brass compass that no longer pointed north, because Mara had once dropped it near a rail cannon's magnetic housing and laughed when it never recovered. In dreams, the bent needle reminded him that broken things could still tell truth if you understood how to read them. Rook used a deck of old playing cards, each face replaced with names of Marines lost under his command. Sophia used her grandmother's lullaby in Arabic, sung off-key in a kitchen on Mars. Mikhail used a memory of cold so deep it felt like knives in his teeth, from the day he and his brother hid beneath wreckage waiting for Varkesh patrols to pass. The younger analysts monitoring them began to understand something about veteran minds. Trauma, when survived, creates ugly architecture. But architecture is still structure, and structure can be defended. The first direct counterinsurgent happened on day 11. A destroyer crew in orbit over Callisto had suffered synchronized sleep episodes. 2 officers were dead. 1 navigator insisted the stars outside had been rearranged into a script only she could read. Standard sedatives made victims worse. Talia argued they needed to map the invader pattern from inside before it rewrote the whole crew. Jonah volunteered first. Safia swore at him. Rook called him predictable. Talia merely nodded because she had expected nothing else. The connection rig was colder than Jonah remembered. Neural threads settled across his temples and spine. The pod lid lowered. The last thing he heard in the waking world was Talia saying, "If the environment stabilizes beyond level 4, abort." Then sleep took him. He stood on the deck of the destroyer Resolute. At first it looked real, too real. Red emergency lights washed the corridor. Air smelled of ozone, hot metal, and old coffee. Somewhere far away a klaxon pulsed like a failing heart. He flexed his fingers. The brass compass lay in his palm. The bent needle trembled. Not real, he told himself. A young ensign ran toward him, face pale, breath ragged. "Captain, thank God, they're in the command spine." Jonah had never served on the Resolute. The ensign wore the wrong century's insignia, and yet the fear in the man's voice was perfect. "Who's in the spine?" Jonah asked. The ensign stopped. His eyes became mirrored silver. "You are," he said. The corridor folded. Walls liquefied into dark glass. Jonah dropped, not down but inward, through a rain of shattered reflections. In each fragment he saw a different scene from his life. Mara on their wedding day. Mara in combat armor. Mara turning away from him after Epsilon Eridani when he had chosen the mission over medical leave. Mara in the recovery chamber. Then he landed in the house in Oregon. Rain outside. Coffee on the counter. Helena Ward standing by the table. Except Ward had Mara's voice when she spoke. "You always choose the war." Jonah gripped the compass so hard the edge cut his palm. Pain sharpened the scene, which meant the construct wanted him invested. "Not real," he said. Ward smiled with Mara's mouth. "Then why do you keep coming back here?" The front door opened. Mara stepped in. Not young Mara, not soldier Mara, hospital Mara, skin pale. Eyes half-lidded, a line of blood at the corner of her mouth. She looked at Jonah with unbearable tenderness. "You left me there." His breathing went wrong. He knew the rules. He knew guilt bait when he saw it. He knew the invader had combed him and found the oldest fracture. Still, training and knowledge are not the same as immunity. "I came back," he said. "You came back after signing the order. I was trying to save the others." "And me?" Her voice was gentle. Behind her, the room widened into an endless ward of glass pods. Inside each pod lay a sleeping human face. "You taught them how to open the door," she whispered. "Now they're teaching us how to D." Jonah almost believed it. That was the danger. Not monsters, not impossible imagery, meaning. The dream plague built narratives with moral gravity. It did not need to overpower the mind if it could persuade the mind to kneel. Jonah looked down at the compass. The needle spun once, then stopped, pointing not north but toward the pod where Mara seemed reflected in the curved glass. Anchor inversion, he thought. The construct was using his anchor against him, turning emotional truth into navigational error. So he did what shade training had always demanded when symbols were compromised. He broke the symbol. Jonah snapped the compass in half. The world screamed, not with sound, with contradiction. The room flickered between cabin, hospital, battlefield, and destroyer corridor. Mara's face fractured into mirrored planes. Beneath it there was no skull, no flesh, only a geometry of shining facets shifting around in absence. There you are, Jonah thought. He lunged. Hands closed on glass that felt like ice and burning wire together. The thing wearing Mara recoiled, not physically but narratively, as though the story itself had taken a wrong turn. For a heartbeat, he glimpsed the intelligence behind the construct. Vast. Distributed. Patient. It was a choir. Talia's voice crackled in the distance. Jonah, abort now. He ignored her. The mirrored face split into 6 overlapping visages, each alien, each speaking from the same mouth. We enter through sorrow, they said. We remain through certainty. You are easy. You remember pain better than joy. You built no defense against truth. Jonah bared his teeth. Truth doesn't need costumes. Then he drove the jagged half of the compass into the thing's throat. He woke convulsing in the pod, biting through the inside of his cheek so hard blood filled his mouth. Sophia and 2 techs held him down while the lid hissed open. Talia stood at the foot of the rig, pale with fury. You disobeyed an abort command, she snapped. Jonah spat blood into a towel. I saw them. Plural? He nodded. Ward, watching through the observation glass, stepped closer. A coalition interface? More than that, Jonah said. Shared architecture. 6 primary identities, maybe more in support. They aren't just broadcasting a weapon. They're present inside it. Rook, who had remained silent until then, frowned. Command species riding the plague themselves? Or pieces of them, Jonah said. Decision makers, priests, engineers, whatever they call their ruling caste. This isn't automated warfare. Sophia looked at Jonah's bleeding hand. And it means they can be hurt. Everyone in the room felt the change. Until that moment, the dream plague had been weather. A phenomenon. A spreading poison. Now it had faces. And faces could bleed. Over the next month, the Morpheus group entered infected dreamscapes again and again. They learned the plague had layers. The outer layer harvested fear. The second layer reshaped memory motive. The third sought conversion. Victims who reached the third layer began speaking of peace, of surrender, of the relief of not having to choose anymore. They described a shining city behind sleep, where all guilt was dissolved, and all separate selves were joined in perfect reflection. Those people were the most dangerous, not because they raved, because they sounded calm. A tribunal on Luna almost voted to admit Covenant mediators into a quarantine zone after 3 counselors suffered level 3 episodes and insisted humanity's resistance was the only source of violence. A cruiser captain over New Carthage surrendered her ship to inspection drones that did not exist. A popular planetary governor on Mars appeared on live feed and declared that independence of thought was a primitive burden humanity had outgrown. She ended the speech by cutting her own throat with ceremonial glass. Panic spread faster than censorship could contain it. People stopped sleeping alone. Entire neighborhoods on Earth organized watch rotations. Factories shifted to shorter cycles and stimulant rations. Churches filled. Bars filled faster. Children were given dream monitors before they were given school tablets. Families recorded nightly memory statements so loved ones could compare personality drift at breakfast. Human civilization kept functioning, but strain lines showed everywhere. And still the Covenant of Glass sent no fleet. They did not need to. They were teaching us to become our own invaders. Then came the midpoint turn that changed everything. It happened inside a freight station above Neptune, where 8 long-haul pilots had all reported the same impossible detail. In the dream city of glass, behind the mirrored towers and the voices promising unity, there was a sea. Black. Still. Endless. Anyone who crossed it did not wake. Jonah, Rook, Sophia, and Mikhail entered together under linked sedation, a risk Talia called reckless and Ward called necessary. The dream took them into a city brighter than pain should allow. No ass to say. Spires of transparent crystal climbed into a colorless sky. Streets reflected their faces from every angle. Human figures walked there in silence, each one familiar yet wrong, moving with the tranquil purpose of believers approaching absolution. Encore check, Jonah said. Cold wreckage. Mikhail answered. Lullaby intact, Sophia said. Dead men still cheating at cards, Rook replied. Good enough. They moved through the city with weapons their waking bodies did not possess but their dream-trained minds could sustain. Symbolic constructs more than guns, shaped by expectation and will. Rook carried a rifle black as scorched iron. Sophia held a surgical blade that shone blue-white. Mikhail's hands wore gauntlets of cracked ice. Jonah had no weapon at first. At the center of the city stood 6 towers in a circle around the Black Sea. As they approached, human figures turned to watch. Some were people they knew. Sophia saw her younger brother, dead since the Phobos decompression collapse. Mikhail saw his brother Anton, smiling as if no cage had ever touched him. No one broke formation. The sea lay before them like polished obsidian. On its surface moved faint lights, as if stars had drowned beneath it and were trying not to be forgotten. Sophia whispered, "That's not symbolic. I can feel minds under there." Mikhail's voice roughened. "Human minds?" Talia's remote signal, thin and distant through the sedation link, replied, "Unknown. I'm reading impossible density. Jonah, do not engage unless." The sea rose. Not with waves, with faces. Thousands of them. Human faces fused in glass-dark water, mouths opening without breath. Some screamed, some pleaded. Some only stared with the numb astonishment of people who had woken too late. Rook stumbled back a half-step. Jesus. Then the 6 towers spoke as one. "These are the sleepers who crossed willingly," said the choir. "They are preserved from division. They are beyond fear. They are proof." Jonah stepped closer to the shore. He saw age, race, rank, civilian work tags, childhood expressions. He saw a little girl with a missing front tooth. He saw an old man in station coveralls. He saw a pilot from the Resolute whom records listed alive but catatonic. Not dead, he realized. The Black Sea was not a grave. It was a reservoir. And then understanding hit him with the force of impact. The Covenant was not merely attacking human sleep. That was why it knew our grief textures, our family shapes, our private guilt rhythms. It was learning from the people it trapped beyond waking. Sophia saw it too. They turned. A human woman stood there in coalition robes made of mirrored scales. She was middle-aged, severe-faced, silver hair braided close to the scalp. Jonah recognized her after one stunned second. Ambassador Lenora Vale. 3 years earlier, she had vanished en route to negotiations at the neutral station of Euler. Her ship was found empty. The official assumption had been piracy. Rook stared. "That's not possible." Vale smiled sadly. "Everything is possible once they teach you how small a self really is." Sophia stepped forward with the blade raised. "You were taken. I was improved. You're dead." "No," Vale said. "That is your comforting superstition. I crossed the sea. I became useful." Jonah looked closer. Her movements were fluid, but too exact. Her eyes reflected no sky. "You're a puppet." Her expression sharpened. "And you were a fossil clinging to pain because pain is all that tells you where your borders end." The towers glowed brighter. A veil spread her arms toward the city. "Do you understand what humanity offers them? Not industry, not territory. Instability. Your species dreams violently. You imagine futures in conflict, love braided with fear, identity welded through contradiction. They could not crack your minds from the outside until they learned to inhabit your narratives. Now they have. Soon your fleet, your politics, your family bonds, your sense of history, all of it will smooth into consensus." Mikhail snarled. "Consensus is another word for slavery. Only 2 species still addicted to loneliness." Jonah asked the question that mattered more than rage. "Why keep the sleepers alive?" Val's smile widened. "Because they're not only bridges," she said. "They're gates." The sea exploded upward. Faces became hands. Hands became tendrils of black glass. They shot toward the 4 operatives, and the dream city split apart into spirals of mirrored debris. Rook opened fire. Each shot tore burning holes through the tendrils, but more came. Sophia slashed one apart only for it to reform around her wrist with freezing force. Mikhail drove both gauntlets into the ground, sending cracks of ice over the black shore, locking a cluster of grasping limbs long enough for Jonah to drag Sophia free. Vale watched calmly from the rising steps of the nearest tower. "You are late," she called. "The first waking gate opens in 21 hours. Jonah looked up. "Where?" She tilted her head. "You know your species. Where would you build a dream into law?" Then the city collapsed. They woke violently. Mikhail shattered a tooth. Sophia tore the IV from her own arm. Rook vomited beside the pod. Jonah came out already moving, half falling to the deck as tech scrambled clear. Ward met him outside the chamber. "Lenora Vala is alive or something wearing her is," Jonah said. "They're using trapped human consciousness as adaptive architecture, and they're planning a waking gate." Talia frowned. "Something that lets the dream plague manifest during waking cognition," Sophia said, still shaking. "No sleep barrier, no REM dependency." Ward's face darkened. "Where?" Jonah thought of Val's words. "Where would you build a dream into law?" 3 seconds later they had the same answer. Not Old Earth Geneva alone, but the orbital Geneva assembly ring, where inter-system treaties were ratified and broadcast across every major human channel. In 30 hours, the assembly would vote on emergency powers over sleep security measures, identity screening, media quarantine, and military command continuity. Every world would be watching. Every relay would carry the signal. If the Covenant had embedded a threshold construct in the broadcast lattice, they could convert panic into planetary-scale cognitive breach, not just nightmares. Doctrine, command, consent, reality at civic scale. Ward did not waste breath. She ordered the assembly quarantined, traffic interdicted, and every representative confined to secure isolation. But by then the plague had penetrated too deeply into bureaucracy. 3 member systems protested unlawful detention. 2 assembly blocks declared Ward's orders a coup attempt, likely caused by dream contamination. Civilian networks erupted. Protesters gathered outside relay stations on Earth and Mars carrying mirrored masks and signs demanding an end to militarized sleep tyranny. The enemy had prepared the politics as carefully as the weapon, and then came the betrayal. It arrived from inside the moon. One of Talia's senior analysts, a quiet man named Niels Arden, who had overseen neural firewall tuning for 2 weeks, banished from his station during shift rotation. Security found him in the signal basement beneath Artemis Deep, dead by self-inflicted wound beside a manually opened maintenance conduit that connected to an old emergency comm spindle. The conduit had been disconnected from the network years ago. Someone had physically installed a crystalline resonance node inside the spindle, fed by stolen power cells and shielded from ordinary scans by reflective coating. Through that tiny forgotten artery, the dream plague had entered Artemis Deep. "Rook." One of the younger techs shot another in the face because he thought the woman's shadow moved before she did. Then alarms began. Containment doors slammed down. Lights strobed crimson. From sealed dormitories came screams, prayers, laughter, and the dull pounding of frightened people trying to smash through metal with their hands. Talia looked at the feed and went white. Some, not all. If it reaches the pod core, it can rewrite everyone under sedation. Jonah understood immediately. This was not a side attack. This was decapitation. Kill the Morpheus group. Blamed the only people learning to fight back. Size the moon facility and perhaps use it as the first waking gate if Geneva became too contested. He turned to Rook. Armory. Rook was already moving. What followed was not a battle in space and not entirely a battle in dreams. It was something filthy in between. Artemis Deep had narrow corridors, old bulkhead doors, manual overrides, and frightened personnel whose minds could no longer tell friend from enemy. Security drones malfunctioned after receiving contradictory command chains from compromised operators. Atmosphere remained stable, but trust vanished in minutes. Jonah, Rook, Sophia, and Mikhail split to secure the pod core, the jammer ring, medical, and the spindle basement. Ward coordinated from Central Command with a sidearm in hand, because admirals in Legends command from comm rooms. But admirals in real wars sometimes end up standing in smoke over the dead. Jonah and Rook took the pod core. They found 2 technicians trying to open every sedation chamber at once because, as one shouted through tears, they're drowning in there and their copies are coming out. Rook stunned the first. The second opened fire with a maintenance cutter. The beam carved a line across Rook's shoulder armor before Jonah slammed the man into the wall hard enough to knock him senseless. At Pod 7, a sedated patient's monitors spiked into seizure patterns. Jonah looked through the fogged lid and froze. Mara. Not possible. Not alive. Not here. The pod label even read her name. Rook saw Jonah stop and shouted, "Vance!" The thing in the pod opened its eyes, mirrored silver. Jonah fired point blank through the lid. Fluid and glass black fragments burst upward. The illusion vanished, revealing an ordinary trooper under induced contamination episode, implanted with projected identity overlays through the local feed. Rook stared at him a beat too long. "You good?" "No," Jonah said. "Keep moving." On another level, Sophia fought to hold. Medical together. Patients strapped themselves down, begging not to be allowed to sleep. A nurse attacked her with a bone saw, convinced Sophia was there to harvest memories for the reflected city. Sophia disarmed him without breaking his wrist, then broke his jaw when he reached for the saw again. She hated herself for it instantly and kept moving because there was no time to be kind. Mikhail reached the jammer ring and found Nils Arden was not the only traitor. 3 engineers had sealed themselves inside and were methodically switching off phased disruptors one by one. They wore mirrored contact film over their eyes and smiled as if hearing beautiful music. "Open the door," Mikhail ordered over comm. One of them replied, "You can sleep now, Anton." Only his brother used to say his name that way. Mikhail stared at the blast window for one raw second, then shot the control hinges and forced the door manually against venting pressure. Inside, the engineers rushed him with tools and bare hands. He put 2 down non-lethally. The third bit through his own tongue and spat blood in Mikhail's face before lunging for the main breaker. Mikhail broke the man's arm. The breaker still went halfway. Half the moon facility shuddered. In Central Command, Talia said the words no one wanted to hear. "It's not just an infiltration. They're trying to synchronize every slooper here for mass crossing." Ward understood. A reservoir jump. Jonah's stomach dropped. If the trapped human minds beneath the Black Sea could be shifted wholesale through a concentrated signal event, Artemis Deep would become a beachhead, not for bodies, but for cognitive occupation. "Can you stop it?" he asked. Talia looked at the data and answered with brutal honesty, "Not from this side." There it was, the impossible choice waiting since the shuttle landed in Oregon. To stop the gate, someone would have to go back into the shared dream architecture and sever the reservoir linkage at its source while the facility held together in the waking world. A deep insertion, unstable, possibly one way. Rook said, "No." Jonah had not yet spoken, but Rook knew him too well. Sophia's voice cut over comms, fierce and frightened. "Absolutely not. We barely got out last time." "We don't have another option," Jonah said. "We find one." "Before synchronized crossing?" "No." Talia spoke softly. "There may be a way to collapse the gate if a lucid operator reaches the C-nexus and forces catastrophic symbolic rejection, but the operator would be exposed to full reservoir pressure." Rook gave a humorless laugh. "In plain language?" "In plain language," Talia said, "the dreams of thousands of trapped minds will try to pull that person under all at once." Mikhail came onto the channel breathing hard. "Then it takes all of us." Jonah almost said no. Then he remembered the Black Sea. The way the trapped had mouthed without breath. "None of us get out alone," Mara had once told him during shade training. That's the lie they used to break teams. The insertion chamber shook as distant impacts rolled through the facility. Maybe sabotage, maybe people dying, maybe systems tearing themselves apart under contradictory commands. It no longer mattered. Chemical stabilizers primed. Ward stood over Jonah before the lids closed. For the first time since Oregon, her expression cracked. "If you can't return," she said, "I need you to know this was my order." Jonah looked up at her. "No, Helena. This one is mine." Then the lids descended. The dream seized them without transition. No city this time, no gradual entry. Only the Black Sea beneath a stormless void, vast and close, with the 6 towers already leaning inward like judges over a pit. The water churned with human faces. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. And among them walked Lenora Vale across the surface as if it were polished stone. "You chose the oldest human strategy," she said. "Refusal." Rook raised his rifle. "Works more often than you'd think." He fired. Vale shattered into a flock of mirrored birds that whirled upward and reformed atop the central tower. The sea began to pull. Jonah felt memories loosening inside him like bolts under strain, not erased, claimed. His first deployment, Mara's laughter. The smell of his mother's coat in winter when he was 6. The shame of surviving men better than himself. The warm cup in the Oregon kitchen. All of it tugged downward toward assimilation. Sophia dropped to one knee, singing the lullaby through clenched teeth. Mikhail roared and drove both fists into the dark water, freezing a spreading shelf around them. Rook fired into the faces climbing the ice, each shot a name. Each name a refusal. Yona looked up at the towers and finally understood the shape of the trap. The Covenant believed identity was a weakness because identity created conflict. Humans survived because identity created loyalty. Memory hurt us. Memory divided us. Memory also told us who we had promised not to abandon. That was the battlefield, not fear. Remembrance, he shouted to the others. Don't fight the dreams. Call the real. Sophia looked up, startled. Then she understood. Instead of resisting with empty will, she named her first patient who died in her arms on Ceres, and why she still came back to the ward every shift. Mikhail named his brother Anton, not the smiling false version, but the terrified young man in the Varkesh cage, who had still cracked jokes through broken teeth. Rook named every Marine on his cards, voice growing louder with each one, not as ghosts, but as men whose flaws and courage he would not let be polished into symbols. The sea recoiled. The trapped faces changed. Some began to remember themselves. Not all, not enough, but enough. The black water convulsed as thousands of stolen human narratives stopped flowing in the direction the Covenant demanded. The choir in the towers rose in fury. Separation is agony. Individual memory is contagion. You choose suffering. You choose war. You choose death. Yona stood at the edge of the ice and felt Mara near him before he saw her. She emerged from the sea not in uniform, not dying, not accusing. Just Mara, rain in her hair, one eyebrow lifted the way she used to when he was missing the obvious. You know what this is, she said. He swallowed. A weapon? No. The tower screamed. The sea pulled harder. His knees shook. Mara stepped closer. What did they use to take Mu from you? He answered, because some truths cannot be evaded forever. My guilt. And what did you use to keep me? He could not speak. Her expression softened. Nothing, Jonah. That was the wound. You kept the guilt because it was heavier than grief. It made you feel useful. Mara touched his chest above the heart. Warm. Impossible. Maybe memory. Maybe dream. Maybe the last defense his mind could build. He no longer cared. You cannot beat them by clinging to what was taken, she said. Only by giving back what is yours to carry. He understood then. The reservoir fed on unresolved possession, on minds trying to keep the dead unfinished, on wounds preserved as open doors. Human memory was powerful not because it never broke, but because it let pain become duty rather than surrender. Jonah looked at the sea and made the choice. He released her. Not forgot, never that. Released. The difference mattered. He took every memory of Mara as it truly was. Love, anger, laughter, arguments, missions, coffee steam, hospital light, the last unfinished goodbye, and instead of gripping it like a blade, he let it become a line cast outward. A gift. A witness. A declaration that the dead belonged to the living memory of those who loved them, not to an enemy's archive. The brass compass appeared whole in his hand. This time the needle pointed straight down into the sea. Names of the living, names of the dead, names of ships, homes, promises, disaster survived, children protected, lovers buried, commanders hated, friends missed. Trench of light tore through the black reservoir to depths no dream should contain. Inside that light were millions of memory fragments separating from the Covenant lattice like sparks from a severed cable. The towers cracked from base to peak. Lenora shrieked as her body fragmented, revealing 6 alien forms nested in mirrored geometry beneath the human mask. For the first time, their voices lost calm. You would preserve grief. You would choose division. You would remain wounded. Yona faced them with the compass raised like a knife. Yes, he said. That's how we know what matters. Then he drove the compass into the heart of the sea. The climax did not feel triumphant. It felt like drowning in everyone. Every trapped dream surged upward at once. Jonah saw childhood bedrooms on Earth and Mars, starship corridors, weddings, Fires, broken helmets, old songs, last words, betrayals real and imagined. He felt panic, relief, shame, love, homesickness so fierce it became physical pain. Human consciousness, in all its contradiction, passed through him like a flood through a collapsing dam. Somewhere distant, Talia was screaming his name over the link. Somewhere closer, Mara whispered, "Wake up." The sea detonated into light. In Artemis Deep, every pod alarm hit maximum at once. Power grids blew. The spindle conduit melted. 3 containment doors warped from heat. Mikhail flatlined for 7 seconds before Talia shot him back hard enough to crack 1 electrode mount. Jonah did not wake, not immediately. In the dream's final aftermath, he stood alone on a shoreline at dawn. Real dawn, if such a thing exists in the mind. The Black Sea was gone. Only ordinary water remained, gray-blue beneath a widening sky. Mara stood beside him. No accusation now, no mystery. Just the unbearable gentleness of farewell done correctly. "Did I save them?" he asked. "Some," she said. "Enough." "That sounds like something you'd say before making me do more work." She smiled. "You always needed instructions disguised as affection." He laughed, and it broke into tears before he could stop it. "I'm tired," he said. "I know." He looked at her. "If I go with you, you don't get to choose that because you're tired." That sounded exactly like her. She touched his face once, then stepped back into the morning light. "When you wake," she said, "remember me honestly." He reached for her, missed, and opened his eyes to pain, alarms, and Sophia slapping him hard across the cheek. "Don't you dare," she said, voice shaking. He coughed, inhaled burnt air, and started laughing weakly because it hurt too much to do anything else. The gate at Artemis Deep collapsed, and so did the Covenant's first major offensive. But victory was not clean. 213 facility personnel were dead from the breach, sabotage, or dream-induced violence. 17 remained in permanent unresponsive states. Across human space, thousands emerged from Catatonia over the following weeks, carrying shattered memories and patchwork identities that would never fit together perfectly again. Yet something fundamental had changed. Recovered victims began describing a new feature inside their nightmares. Voices calling real names, true names, cutting through the reflected city like flares through fog. Families learned to fight back with memory circles before sleep. Veterans taught civilians how to build anchors from honest pain instead of false reassurance. Human networks shifted from broad passive entertainment streams to interactive communal watch systems filled with check-ins, songs, family stories, military roll calls, neighborhood rituals, and recorded testimony. The Covenant had tried to weaponize the private mind. Humanity answered by making memory a civic defense. Geneva never became a waking gate. The assembly broadcast was cancelled. Instead, Admiral Ward addressed every human world through hardened channels with no visual feed, only voice. She told the truth. About the plague. About the infiltrations. About the dead. About the fact that fear of contamination could not justify surrendering judgment to panic or to any authority promising perfect safety. It was the most human speech of her life. Imperfect, grim, stubborn. And it held. Then the fleet struck back. Not blindly. Not in rage. With coordinates pulled from fractured Covenant signatures recovered during the reservoir collapse, human intelligence finally mapped 3 Dream engine arrays hidden in neutral systems and a command sanctuary orbiting a brown dwarf where the Covenant's memory priests had nested their shared interface cores. The war that followed lasted 11 months. Ships burned. Stations cracked. Arrayed boots crossed corridors filled with mirrored glyphs and neural traps. There were boarding actions where soldiers wore sleep inhibitors so strong their hands shook on triggers. There were special teams trained in paired recitation doctrine, entering combat with each trooper responsible for preserving the other's identity under cognitive attack. Rook led one such team through the sanctuary over the brown dwarf. He came back with half his face scorched and all 6 primary interface cores destroyed. Mikhail never fully quit drinking, but he did stop trying to die with it. He trained anti-intrusion cadres on outer colonies and became, to his endless annoyance, a hero to freight crews. Sophia founded the first recovery ward for post-plague survivors on Luna. She filled it with music, low light, and walls where patients could write names they refused to lose. Talia Chen wrote the doctrine that changed human civilization more than any admiral or politician, not a weapon manual, a memory charter. It argued that identity resilience was strategic infrastructure, that history, grief rituals, family testimony, veteran witness, local culture, and even stubborn personal habits were not soft luxuries of peace, but hardened defenses against any enemy seeking to standardize the soul. Some mocked it. Most did not. Most did not. As for Jonah Vance, he refused promotion, refused politics, refused every attempt to turn him into a symbol. He returned to Oregon after the armistice, walking with a worse limp and sleeping no better than before. But the empty second chair by the fireplace did not feel like punishment anymore. Sometimes he left coffee there anyway, not because he believed ghosts needed cups, because memory, honestly kept, is a form of company. Years later, during the tribunal over surviving Covenant officials, one captured warrior priest was asked why their coalition had underestimated humanity. The translator rendered its answer in a thin mechanical voice. "We believed pain would make you yield," it said. "We did not understand that pain, among humans, becomes attachment." Only humans could have survived that war because only humans were stubborn enough to drag all their scars into sleep and call them by name. We did not win because we were fearless. We won because we were afraid and remembered anyway. We won because our dead were not tools. Because our grief was not a door once we stopped offering it as one. Because the things that make us vulnerable, love, memory, regret, loyalty, unfinished mourning, are also the things that make us impossible to erase. And somewhere, in the dark between stars, species that had once considered humanity a loud, violent, temporary problem, began teaching their children a different caution. Never enter a human dream unless you are prepared to meet everything they have survived. If this story stayed with you, stay here in Midnight Galaxy for the next one. There are always more stars, and humanity is never done proving what it can endure.